Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's live online author event with Greenlight Bookstore. I'm Josie, the Events and Marketing Manager here at Greenlight, and we are thrilled to host tonight's event with Jennifer Close launching her new novel, Marrying the Ketchups. She'll be talking with Grant Ginder, so you're all in for an excellent time. Before we start, I just want to say a huge thanks to Jennifer, Grant, and the team at Knopf for making this happen, and to all of you for showing up. We're grateful for your support and for the chance to make space for conversation and connection. Now, just a few housekeeping things before we begin. In our Zoom webinar tonight, you can see and hear the speakers, but they cannot see or hear you. They can see that you're here, though, and there are a couple of different ways you can interact with the authors and with each other throughout tonight's event. The first is the chat, which you can find by clicking on the icon that looks like one speech balloon. You're welcome to post your comments and thought in the chat. That's a great way to interact with the authors and with each other throughout the evening. If you have a specific question you'd like to have answered, please post that question in the Q&A module. You can find it by clicking on the icon that looks like two speech balloons. We'll be pulling questions only from the Q&A to be answered at the later part of this program. And most importantly, tonight's featured book, Marrying the Ketchups, is available for sale from Greenlight Bookstore. You can shop in person at both of our locations, where you can purchase Jennifer and Grant's book and many others on site. You can also order online at greenlightbookstore.com for a quick pickup or shipping anywhere in the US. I'll drop a buy link in the chat shortly. As a thank you for attending tonight's event, we're offering 10% off the featured book. You can enter the coupon code GreenlightEvents10 into the discount section at checkout for 10% off. Now on to the good stuff. Our interviewer tonight is Grant Ginder. Grant is the author of 5 novels, including The People We Hate at the Wedding, soon to be a major motion picture starring Allison Janney, Kristen Bell, and Ben Platt. Originally from Southern California, Ginder received his MFA from NYU, where he teaches writing. He'll be speaking with our featured author, Jennifer Close, who is the best-selling author of Girls in White Dresses, The Smart One, and The Hopefuls. Born and raised on the North Shore of Chicago, she is a graduate of Boston College and received her MFA in fiction writing from the New School in 2005. She now lives in Washington, D.C., and teaches creative writing at Catapult. Jennifer's new book, Marrying the Ketchups, is an irresistible comedy of manners about 3 generations of a Chicago restaurant family and the deep-fried, beer-battered, cream cheese frosted love that feeds them all. Award-winning author Rumaan Alam praised how Close mercilessly and hilariously skewers the indignities of modern romance, the absurdities of family life, and the tribalism of the American Midwest. So y'all are in for something really special tonight. Jennifer is going to start us off with a reading from the book, and then she'll be talking with Grant and with all of you. So please take it away, Jennifer and Grant.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. I'm also very excited to have Grant here. This is just how his book always is, actually, on my shelf.
That's how your book always is on my shelf. Well, I don't have a shelf right now because I'm in a very sterile hotel room in Rancho Mirage, California. Hence why that cactus is there. But
I just want people to think this is where you live. I like it. I think that's your vibe.
There's like a really comfortable sofa, though.
Yeah.
So, okay.
If anyone hasn't read this is Grant's new book, which is amazing. Anyway, I like snort laughed while I read it.
About your book, go.
Okay, sorry. All right, I will keep going. Anyway, I'm so happy to have Grant here because, as was just said, you know it's going to be a good time. So I'm going to do a short reading. This is the first time I've read from this book. This is from the point of view of Teddy, who's one of the Sullivan cousins. And all you need to know about what's happening in the scene is that his ex-boyfriend keeps showing up at Sullivan's, the family restaurant. Teddy saw Anna clearing Walter's plate and noticed that Walter had barely touched the chicken pot pie. There were flakes of crust around the plate, piles of filling everywhere, as if he were pretending to eat but hadn't taken a single bite. Teddy took this as a direct insult. Walter liked restaurants, but he didn't really like food. He was always amused at the way Teddy examined each dish, the notebooks he kept with menu ideas, the actual menus he kept piled at his apartment. "I'm not such a foodie," Walter said once, wrinkling his nose at Teddy's enthusiasm over a perfectly grilled piece of swordfish. And maybe Teddy should have known right then that things wouldn't work between them, because it felt lonely when Walter wouldn't try a bite of his fish, or didn't finish the shaved Brussels sprout salad that Teddy made just for him. Teddy loved food, all of it. He loved seafood and local food and fast food. The taste of fresh basil could make him moan, but he also knew an Oreo could brighten a particularly low day, that the artificial white cream could make things just a touch better. Teddy believed that food could cure anything: heartbreak, homesickness, the common cold. During finals in college, he used to make his mom's meatloaf recipe that called for cubes of Velveeta to be mixed inside. He swore the processed cheese made his brain sharper. It was comforting. It was home. Walter once watched Teddy make a casserole with canned soup and visibly shuddered. That's such a Midwestern thing. You probably never had that. I feel like California people are always like, I don't understand what's in that. He didn't understand that there was room for everything: a veiny heirloom tomato sprinkled with salt, and sometimes also a Jell-O salad. For Walter, eating out was about being seen, saying you got a reservation at the hottest new restaurant. The only thing he ordered with glee was foie gras. He made fun of the years that Chicago tried to outlaw it, called Charlie Trotter a pussy for leading the charge against it. Teddy suspected that Walter didn't even like it that much. It was more that he liked the idea of it, that it made him feel powerful to have a part in force feeding and killing a goose. It was the strangest thing to know that Walter wasn't a good person and to miss him anyway. Teddy prided himself on being an aggressively positive person, but these past few months had thrown him. The breakup made him worry that he'd never be happy again. This won't last forever, Cindy told him, but what did she know? Weren't there some people who never recovered from heartbreak? Wasn't it possible that he could be one of them? Teddy was trying. He went to SoulCycle and meditated. He scheduled extra sessions with his therapist. He read self-help books and placed inspirational notes around his apartment. He volunteered. He reactivated his online dating profiles. He considered getting a dog until he dog sat his friend Matt's dog, Schnitzel the Schnauzer, and woke up to a fresh pile of shit in his kitchen each morning. He quit his job. He tried to erase Walter, and Walter tracked him down. He was trying, but none of it was working. The worst part was that Teddy lost his appetite. He still ate, but it was all uninspired. A banana or a hard-boiled egg in the morning. For lunch, he'd slice and salt an avocado, wanting something that would slip down his throat without much effort. This won't last forever, he told himself. It can't last forever. In the meantime, he would go home tonight and fry 2 pieces of bacon. He would toast an English muffin and spread it with peanut butter. He would break each piece of bacon into fourths and arrange them just so on top, creating the perfect mix of salty and sweet. The crumbly bacon would melt into the creamy peanut butter. Don't knock it until you try it. He would pour himself a large glass of Cabernet and sit at his kitchen table and enjoy it. He would at least try. And I think ending with peanut butter and bacon is the way to do it. So
there's no better way to go. So when I read this book, I think I like gained 10 pounds maybe, because I was like that passage that you just read. I was like, peanut butter and bacon, I'm gonna try that. You do such a wonderful job of writing about these incredibly fattening foods and like the the deep fried love of this family. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because writing about food is really hard.
First of all, I can think of no better compliment than saying like you wanted to eat about anything I was talking.
Anything, literally, including the sandwich loaf.
So good. It's so good.
Can you describe us? I'm not going to give anything away about where the sandwich loaf like appeared.
No, I will get into that. I mean, here's the thing about, I'm from Chicago and Midwestern food is different. And I think I didn't realize that for a while. And I have a friend who's from California, and she at one point, this was like last year, she was like, can you come over and show me how you made those pigs in a blanket? Like she said it like she was, and I was like, I can. And I'm like, the ones at the Pillsbury Crescent rolls and the mini hot dogs. She was like, yeah, that's a fun lark. And I was like, you've never had them before. And as I was making them, my friend who's also from Chicago and her husband who's from Minnesota, we all were like, this reminds me of Thanksgiving. This reminds me of football days. I'm like, the Midwest food, like the canned soup, the like heavy food, it all has something. And I like loved really writing about that. Did you try the peanut butter and bacon?
Yes.
Oh, it's so good.
It's delicious.
It's delicious. So the sandwich loaf is something I actually don't know. It's something I had growing up. I write about it as something that it was served at like showers. And I think that really is what it was, like wedding and baby showers. There was a place that made it. It looks like a cake. It's so good. You take a loaf of bread and you slice it horizontally. And then in each layer, you put something in it. So the one that I used to have, it was like chicken salad, egg salad, ham salad.
Wild.
I don't think there was tuna in it, but there might have been. Like, it's all like mayonnaise-based salads. And then it's put back together and frosted. So it looks like a cake. But when you slice into it, you get one of each layers. And first of all, it's funny, like I was a picky eater when I was younger, which just totally went away as I got older. And I used to be like, ew. And then you would try it and you'd be like, oh, it's amazing. And I don't know why. Like,
right. Because it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be.
It's wrong on so many levels.
I mean, what is the secret? We were talking a little bit about this earlier, just like about, again, how hard it is to write about food in fiction with it not sounding like a really poorly written menu or like ad copy for a cereal or something, you know what I mean? Where it's like, oh, crispy, right? But it's like it's really hard to write about food in an enticing and interesting way, and yet this book is, I mean, food plays such a central role, right? I mean, it's the thing, and I love the passage that you read. It's the thing that heals. It's the thing that brings us together. And what is the secret though about writing successfully about food in fiction?
I don't know. I'm so happy you think I did it well. I'm really drawn, like Heartburn is one of my all-time favorite books. I teach it, like, I just think it's amazing. And she's a cookbook author in it. For anyone who hasn't read it, buy it immediately. It's such a short little book, but she slides in these recipes. And the whole thing is like, it's so much a part of, I guess, if you like to cook and if you like to like gather people around, it's so much a part of like what you do. And you're like, oh, that would be the perfect thing. So I think I'm always drawn to books that write about food in a great way. I was saying this earlier, but Rumaan Alam does it so well in a way that like his books are not about food, but I do think he is a cook. And I think that he likes talking about it in the same way as like it gathers families together. And he, in That Kind of Mother, one of his characters made carbonara. And when I read it, I was like, oh my God, I forgot how much I love carbonara. And I went on a kick making it to the point where Tim was like, what's happening? Like, why are we having it again? And I'm like, don't worry about it. So I think I was just I made a point to make sure I was like reading a lot of books because I wanted to get it right. Like, it is hard to think of all the right descriptions. And how do you tell people that peanut butter and bacon is a necessary thing that they should have for life? Like, you have to, it's
right. Right. It's so hard. Do you have a background in a restaurant? I mean, because so much of this book is set at Sullivan's, right? Which is, and you do a really incredible job of having Sullivan seem like the center of the universe. I mean, when I was reading the book, whenever we like weren't in Sullivan's, I was like, I'm a little nervous. When are we going to get back to Sullivan's? Right, okay. Like, you know, like did you work in a restaurant? Why did you decide to set this book at a restaurant?
Yeah, I worked in a restaurant in college and right after, and it was a family-owned restaurant in Chicago. I think they actually were all so scared when they were like, what's your book about? I'm like, don't worry, it's not about all of you. But I think for anyone who's worked in a restaurant, one of my best friends in DC ran a restaurant here. I had another friend who ran a restaurant. Their stories. I mean, did you ever work in a restaurant?
I did retail. I worked at the Gap.
Oh, that makes perfect sense. I bet you were so good at it too. There's so much drama. I think because like you're running around, there's like at the restaurant I worked at, I think they changed this, but like we were friends with all the bartenders. So like at a certain point we'd be like, I guess we'll just start having a drink. You know what I mean? Like it was so fun, especially at that age. And I just loved the idea of setting something there because it's like, there's just like a busyness that I think is really appealing. And between the staff, there's so much that goes on that you're like, I think when you eat at a restaurant, you have no idea what could be like, and I just love that sort of feeling of like, you know, it's like the upstairs downstairs thing, but
yeah.
Yeah.
You started this book, if I remember correctly. I mean, you first told me about this book when we were having drinks, multiple drinks. But that was like before Trump was elected, right? Was when you were kind of conceiving of the book. How did the politics of the last like 6 years affect the process of writing the book? Because I'm imagining like you conceived of this thing and then the world suddenly changed for the worse. And how did you reckon with that?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this so much because actually when I watch all your interviews, I'm like, oh, Grant sounds so smart about like why he wrote this book and what because yours also has to do with politics. And you say like, my question was like, how far do you go to protect what you think is right? Right. Or am I getting that right? But like, it's so true. And I think, no, this book was not supposed to have any politics in it. it like derailed. I mean, I'm gonna say I blame Trump for a lot, but I think like part of it is like why it took me so long to write this book, because when the election happened, I felt like it was really hard to think about setting it before that because it was all I could think about. And so it just started creeping its way in. And here's the thing, had I known how much it would creep its way in, I don't know if I would have done anything differently. But like once you start, these characters were not the kind of characters who were going to go through life and not think about what was happening in the news, right? So it was like, but then once I started, it was like a snowball where it was like, oh, it's kind of taking over. And did you read The Most Fun We Ever Had?
No, I
Oh,
didn't.
it's so good. It's such a great book. And
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know her, so this is totally a guess, so I might totally be wrong, but it's, she kind of just like doesn't talk about politics, and I think they say that in one review, but my guess is like she either had to go in or out. It's like
Yeah,
he's trying to tell his family story, and like it overtakes it, right? Like it overtook it. The first time I wrote a scene where I said I like wrote the word Trump, I was like, oh, I don't want him in my book.
Yeah.
Like what? And I'm happy. I mean, I was happy to tell this story because I think like I was sort of writing it as I was going through it, which probably is also why it took so long, because it was like that feeling of like everything you do is surrounded by this noise of all this awful stuff happening, and like what do you do, right? Like how do you get through it? So it really changed it in a way that's never happened with any of my other books. I hope it doesn't happen again.
What's so amazing is that so I feel like so much, and we talked about this a little bit when you and I talked earlier, and we talked about it, but like I feel like a lot of fiction that's dealt with politics in recent years does it through metaphor or does it kind of obliquely, right? And I mean, these characters are very much living in our world and talking about events that we recognize. I mean, one of the opening scenes of the book takes place at the Women's March, right? And so like there you address the political events of the past however many years really head on. What was the decision to do that? But it never overtakes it, right? It never, like it still feels like a family story. Like I never felt overwhelmed by the politics, but it felt very real. What was the decision? What was the motivation behind the decision to just kind of like attack it head on?
It's funny because that scene at the Women's March did come later, because I think I was trying to like get in it in a different way. And then there's something really funny about the timing of once I decided this is going to start in 2017, and that the Cubs were going to be this whole thing of it, right? Because this is a Chicago family that loves the Cubs. I'm a huge Cubs fan. And it was a really weird experience to be like just like couldn't believe the Cubs won. It felt like so unreal. And then the next week was the election, and you were like, what's happening? What's going on in our world? Yeah. So I did like the idea of writing about that. It's a pretty specific experience, but everyone from Chicago, I feel like, is like, yeah, that was really weird. And then again, once I just started going in, it was kind of like it was happening all around us. I feel like there's a little bit of like the idea of one of the characters kind of starting to like open her eyes to the way like women are just sort of treated differently, which I think is something that happened to a lot of people, where it was like, oh yeah, that has always happened, and I guess that's not normal.
Yeah.
You're like,
okay.
Oh,
yeah,
that is weird. Yeah.
That is.
And so I think it was kind of therapeutic, and I think it just kept creeping in, because then once I said it this time, it was like, oh, but now this is happening here. They're for sure going to talk about it or notice it, or it's going to like make them think about things differently. So it just was kind of like, as I was writing, this is why the first draft was such a mess. The funny thing is, when Grant is talking about when I first was like, this is what my book's about, I was like, the first draft will probably be done in like a month, 6 weeks. And then like 8 years later, I feel like he was like, are you okay?
Not true. Not true. Not true at all. Yeah. Were there other, well, actually, no, there's one more political thing I want to get to, sorry. But we won't let it overtake this conversation. But you use it in this way of asking like really, I think, questions that were weighing on everyone, that in the same way that you were like, oh, I noticed that, like, oh yeah, women have been treated like shit, right? And like, and then suddenly we like noticed that, right? But you bring up that like there is a character in the book without spoiling anything who's like, I'm in this marriage that that is not the best for me, and it's like, why be in an unhappy marriage? And that the Times made the Times review, glowing review in the Times, everyone, by the way, of Jennifer's book, incredible review. Like I'm gonna use it as wallpaper around my apartment. But the Times review made this point as well, that it like asked this question like, okay, I don't want to be in an unhappy marriage. Well, I really don't want to be in an unhappy marriage when the world is ending. Right. But you bring up this other question that Teddy asks at a certain point. He kind of gets himself in this moral pickle, and I think he was my favorite character. And he's like a really good person, like an inherently very good, caring person. But he asks himself when he's in this moral pickle, like, well, what's the point of being good anymore? Right. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, Teddy is also my favorite. He's the only one in the family that really cooks. And because they're a restaurant family, there's a lot of food, but he's the one that like really like food is so much more of his life. And I gave him of all the things that like you pull from real life, there's a mention that in his preschool report card, the teacher says like he has trouble remembering which snack is his own, which is from my own preschool report.
You would like take other people's snacks.
I remember reading that as an adult and being like, this isn't great, but yeah, like just trouble. They said it in a really nice way, but yeah. And I had this idea. I mean, a lot of the characters, not so much Gretchen, but I gave them all something that I feel like I really related to. And Teddy and Jane are kind of similar, but Teddy's whole thing is like, I always do the right thing. I'm always responsible. I'm always there for my family. And I'm not winning. And he gets so frustrated. And I think especially during this time, there was that question of like, what's the point? Like, why are we being honest? Right. Like, and I liked the idea of him just sort of like getting so fed up with that, because he always feels like he's not really appreciated by his family. And he's the one that like does the work and shows up. And I just, he is a good person though. That's the thing that I love. But I did love the idea of him sort of like watching what was happening in the world and being like, oh, forget it. Like, why do I even try? It doesn't matter. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
He still stays a really good person.
Yeah, he's great.
He's a great character. Yeah. What else changed over there? I'm always curious to ask writers this. Like, what else changed? Were there any like big things that changed over the course of drafting aside from the politics?
Oh, that is a good question. No, I mean, it always started, Gretchen was the first character, and I don't think we've talked about this, but I feel like maybe you'll appreciate it. Like, she's a singer in a band. And I think for me, there's always—
What's the band called?
It's called Donna Martin Graduates.
Yeah, we're gonna
and I will tell you, my friend, the one from California who was like, pigs in a blanket. What is that? She's the one that named it. Cause I was like, I have to think of a good, there's a 90s cover band, and I actually know the lead singer here whose name is Gretchen, and it's called White Ford Bronco. And I'm like, that's an amazing name.
White Ford Bronco?
Yeah, which is great, right? God. Like, of course. And so I was like, I need something really good. But I think it was hard. Like, we have our own days when we talk about writing and the business, and it's hard. But I think something I always think is like, well, at least I'm not an actor or a singer, because then you're like out there. Do you know what I mean? Like, apologies to all of my actor and singer friends, but like that to me seems like that's even harder. Like, it's hard enough to like spend your time doing this and being like, am I wasting my time? Like, is this worth anything?
Right.
This can go badly and then it's over. But the idea that like, you do sort of put yourself out there with a new book, but not in the same way that you physically put yourself out there to sing. So I think that became a bigger part of it than I thought it would be. Just sort of like her journey of like, what happens if it doesn't work out? And like, what do you, like, how long do you try something like that? And what do you do? So I think that I was surprised at where that went, because when I wrote it, I was just sort of like, oh, that seems like a fun job for her to have. And then it kind of took over.
Yeah. Okay. So Donna Martin Graduates. It's a 90s cover band, right? They do like weddings. They like have a loyal kind of NYU following. But what's interesting to me is like 90s nostalgia is like huge right now, right? Like, it's everywhere. You see it in literature. Like, my students at NYU are all dressing like how I dressed in high school. It's just like, it's crazy. What do you think accounts for that?
I mean, I think it's like the clothes are like really
wild.
It's wild. That is the thing. I mean, I did talk about that a little bit in here. And when I wrote it, I feel like it's just gotten worse, where all of a sudden you're like I bought a fanny pack and now I'm like, it's called a belt bag now. And it's super cool. Like, I'm like, why are you lying to yourself? Like, it's a fucking fanny pack. Sorry. But there are some things that I'm like, the fashion is wild that it's coming back. I mean, for me, those songs that I write about, and it was tricky too, like, because Gretchen's a little bit younger than I am. So sometimes it didn't line up when I was writing about certain things. I was like, oh, shoot, like where she would have a memory of the songs.
Right. She has her list of favorite songs, right? One of which, like there's like a Dave Matthews Band song.
I mean, if you ever saw Dave Matthews in person and you didn't get chills when Ants Marching started, you're lying. You're lying.
Were you one of those people that like went to like 9,000 Dave Matthews Band concerts?
He was always in Chicago. I feel like he came like 5 times my senior year in high school.
I'm trying to find the list of Gretchen's favorite songs. But it seemed like he was the only explanation is there were 8 Dave Matthews, right? Because he like was everywhere.
He never stopped.
He never stopped. He just
and I loved that. Was actually much harder for me to write about. Music is hard for me to write about, I think, and I think it's hard to do it well. And I think unless like one of those songs is also your song, like the Cranberries are on there, and I will say like that happens to me where sometimes I'm just in like CVS and like Dreams comes on and I'm like kind of crying, like that face just like moving around. But yeah, it's like I feel like especially at that point in like high school, college, those songs have so much like energy and emotion and like drama attached to them in a way that maybe goes away a little bit later, right? Like you're like, is this boy going to talk to me tonight at the bar? You know what I mean? Like, is this relationship going to work out or am I going to die? You know, like it's like
maybe it has something to do with the fact that they are like, we were listening to them as teenagers when like everything felt like everything was either wonderful or catastrophic, right? There was nothing between. And so these songs like have those potent emotions attached to them.
Yeah.
I'm the same way when I like hear Cranberries, or if I hear like Natalie Imbruglia's Torn, I'm like, oh.
That one is a real, I mean, there's that one's on there too. Torn, yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah, Torn's #1, I think, on her list.
Torn is #1, yeah. That list is just like, that was a really fun part to write. But yeah, I mean, did you see Dave Matthews in concert or no?
No.
Oh.
Yeah, I know. Though
I think this is another California, Chicago difference.
No, it's definitely not. It's definitely not. The reason that I never saw Dave Matthews,
I'm not like proud of it. I'm not like still a DMB hard fit, like, you know.
Well, there was this kid I remember that I went to this fellow student who I went to high school with, who he was like president of the Dave Matthews fan club, and he was like in all of my classes, and the only thing he talked about was the Dave Matthews Band, and I was like, give it a rest, you know. And he was the first one to get tickets, and he was like, oh yeah, I'm going to Red Rock to see them, like, you know. I mean, it was just like absolutely, it was like an obsession. And so I think I like put my foot down, and I was like, I'm not jumping on this train.
I get it.
Okay, so Gretchen has the band and the 90s cover band, right? That without giving anything away, she's kind of asking herself, like, how long can I keep doing this? And then Jane is who's Gretchen's sister, without giving really anything away, ends up going down like really deep internet stalking rabbit holes. Yeah. How many hours a day on average would you say you internet stalk people?
I was like 20 to 22. It's not a big deal. That part was really fun to write. And I just read this great book called A Novel Obsession. And it's like, it takes it even like that little section of her sort of internet stalking was really fun and satisfying, because there is nothing more fun than like, especially if you have a glass of wine and then like 2 hours later, you're on like the person who you were originally looking at, you're on like their cousin's sister-in-law's best friend. And you're like, what is this person? Like my friend Emily calls it going deep, which sounds so gross, but like she'd always be like, ooh, I went deep last, because like she, you know, this was like in her younger years. So I don't internet stalk that much anymore, but I'm not saying, you know, I'm also too nervous. I feel like I would like a picture and be like, I could clone.
It's always like the people, at least for me, it's like the people that like, I'm like, why am I stalking this person? It's never anyone that I like actually care about, right? It's just like, it's some person, and I just go down. Going deep is a great, like, it's like not even, it is like so much deeper than a rabbit hole, right?
Well, 'cause you're in there like Easter brunch pictures from like 1995, and you're like, they didn't even have this at this point. Like these, they like uploaded. What am I doing? Like it like is a weird lulling thing that pulls you in. And I think because like we didn't always have it. Like
Yeah.
sometimes like in the earlier days, but like I think there is sort of this fascination of like what you can find, right? Like it's really interesting.
Yeah. And you know, it's never good what you find. No. Okay, I wonder if you could talk about the title a little bit, which is like, it's a wonderful title. And I talk about its significance in terms of the novel's plots and themes, and then also just what it is for people who might not know.
Yeah. Fun fact, I like really fought this title for a long time. I don't know if I told you that. Like it was the title of the first section. Yeah. And I was like, no, this doesn't feel right. And my editor kept being like, please, please, please. And finally at one point I was like, okay. And I think she thought like I didn't understand and then once we called it that, I was like, yeah, no, that's right. So Marrying the Ketchups is disgusting. And it's something that happens like, I don't hate, not you ask me this, but like, I can always tell when I'm talking to someone, they're like, what is that? And I'm like, ugh, now I have to explain this to you. And like, it's pretty gross. It's like, when you work in a restaurant, this doesn't really happen anymore, but when they used to use the glass bottles. So like when I worked at Hackney's, at the end of the night, like the glass bottles are half empty. There's like crap all over them, you know? And so you take them and you combine them and you just like wipe them down. You make them look, you like boil the tops in this water, you make them look new. And I will say like, while it's completely disgusting, actually my friend that I worked with, we were talking about it and she was like, oh, I never did it. I'm like, you're right, you didn't do it. Like, I feel like she would just like go smoke in the corner and be like, like never. But I found it weirdly satisfying because you're like, they look really good at the end. It just sort of like, I did like writing about it because it was one of those things that I never knew happened until I worked in a restaurant. And I never looked at a bottle of ketchup on the table the same again. Because I was like, you're not new. I don't know what I thought before. I don't know if I thought they just like, every time someone left, they were like, here's a brand new bottle of Heinz. But like, then I would sit down and I'd be like, ugh, probably people were like smoking cigarettes, marrying these ketchups last night, just like ashing in them.
Yeah.
And now here it is too. Like, so I loved writing about that. And I did like sort of the writing that scene where,
great scene.
Because in this book, the family like grows up in the restaurant. So it's a scene from the point of view of Jane when she's little, sitting with the waitresses, which like, you know, when you're younger and you're around older people and you're just kind of like, I just want to be with them and like listen to them talk. So I did really like writing that scene, and it's the right title. I was wrong.
Why is it the right title?
Why is it the right title?
Yeah.
Because I think, and this did not occur to me until later, but what I just said until like well after the book was probably printed, and I was like, oh yeah, huh. The way that I just said that about how like I look at ketchups differently now, I feel like that's a lot of what was happening to them in like what was happening in the world, right? Like the same way that like all the things you're used to as a woman that Jane sort of approaches to, where it's like, oh yeah, no, actually that's not normal for you to call me that, or like, you know what I mean? Like, or to treat me that way or interrupt me. And so I feel like it's just another one of those things where it's like, you see things in a different way. And so it's sort of a metaphor. I didn't plan it that way, but it's how it works.
It's funny how editors can just kind of see that when we can't, right? I guess that's.
And then I did this truly crazy craft project, which I made a bride and a groom.
Oh, I know. That's when I was gonna, when I saw that on social media was when I was gonna call you and be like, is everything okay?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think when people say like, is it as glamorous as I imagine being an author? And you're like, absolutely, absolutely it is.
I made a wedding dress for a ketchup bottle.
Yeah.
Wait,
so great. I'm thriving.
Yeah, just right. I'm sending help. So I mean, this is like your fourth book. So you're a pro at this point. What has changed in terms of process, or what you've learned from, you know, across the four books? Do you do things differently now writing a book than you did when you set out to write your first one? Or, you know, how have you evolved or changed as a writer?
I love this question because this is a question I always ask. And actually, I have questions for you about this too. But the one thing that I'm doing, like, not with this book so much, but that I'm doing with the next one is like, I have no sense of time. When people say like, how long did it take you? I'm like, I don't know. Cause like I thought about it in this year, but I was still finishing that book. So when did I write it? I'm now like journaling each day with what I write and dating it. Almost because I'm curious, and also like there's something that feels really nice about it where I'm like, ugh, this is hard for you. This is always hard for you to do this kind of thing, but like just get it down and do it differently.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also trying to, you can see that right there. I'm trying to plot some things with the book,
yeah.
which I always do later, but I'm trying to do it earlier this time. I got a little lost in this book, so I'm trying to whatever. The main thing that I think has changed is mostly just knowing like there's a point in the first, and I mean, it happens in each book, but I think like you get a little bit more confidence where like you're in middle of it. And it's, I shouldn't say you, because maybe you are not like this, but like, it's such a mess. And you're like, I should just burn it. Like, I don't know, like there's no saving it. This is so bad. And I think what helps with each time is like, you know, like, oh, I came through that. And my husband has this like half supportive, but also I'm always like, you're wrong when I say like, it's never been this hard. And he's like, oh, actually you said this last time and the time before. And I'm always like, worry about yourself. I wasn't talking to you. But I think just knowing that like, that's part of the process is like, you have those really like long down times where you're like, what the heck? Like, where does this start? And that you come out of them. I think that's the easiest thing. The rest of it is just like, it still is hard to sit down and do it. It's more just like, I think I have a little bit more belief in the
right,
like
a little bit more context for like the really dark moments, right? But like I never remember that context either. I mean, like I remember with, you know, usually what happens when I get like my first editorial letter, I'm like, well, I mean, I guess I should just throw this book away. I mean, there's like nothing, there's clearly nothing here that's worth saving. I go through the, like, I might as well like, not even just burn it, but like take a sledgehammer to my laptop and never do this again. You know. So something that I think we've probably, I have two more questions, and I see that we have questions in the Q&A, so we'll go to those. But I just have two more. Okay. I screw you all. I want to ask Jennifer questions. No. My first one is I'm always kind of fascinated, and I'm sure you've heard this before. You know, people say like, oh, novelists just write the same book over and over and over again, and just like in different forms, right? What is the book that you think you're writing over and over and over again?
Yeah, this question really shook me. I like love it and I hate it. Courtney Sullivan asked me this and I was like, oh no, am I writing the same thing? But I think I write a lot about people trying to grow up. That's what I've come to. Like, I think I write a lot about like what it means to be a grown up and like, when do you feel like you have your life together? And like, is it when you have all, and like in different ways across all of my books. I think that's the theme that keeps coming up in this.
Well, yeah, I mean, it certainly plays into this book, right?
What is yours? Do you have an answer for that one?
I don't know. I have an answer that I like say, but like I don't know if it's true. I think that I actually do think this is true. I'm really interested in the imperfect ways that we love one another, and how
I have heard, which is perfect. That's exactly what you write about. And
like, how do we reconcile like our own selfishness with wanting to be there for our loved ones? I think that's what I say that I write about. Who knows?
It's wonderful. Yeah, no, it's perfect.
I've really been working on that one the past few weeks. Okay, my last question before I go to these. Oh, they're great. I can't wait to read these questions for you. So last question before I head to the Q&A from the audience. One book that you would recommend that everyone reads.
You know what I loved this? I actually don't even know if I recommended this to you yet, but I feel like I did. Ghosts by Dolly Alderton. I don't know if I have it here. It's behind me somewhere, but it's so good. It's about a girl who gets ghosted, but it's like not really about that. It's so good.
I've heard of this book. It's
really about like family and friendships and like friendships when people are in different parts of their lives and dating. It is one of those books that like, it's so smart. And she says so many things that you're like, I want to remember that. And it also is the perfect balance for me of like, it's really funny, but it also has like these, like it uses humor to get at these like more serious moments. And I think about it all the time. I've read it twice. I'm probably going to read it. Like I really, really loved it so much. It's great.
Okay. Ghosts, plural?
Ghost.
Okay.
Ghost. Now I'm scared. Dolly Alderton, though, is the name. I'm scared that because there's another one called like Ghosted, and that's not, this one is Ghost or Ghosts. Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, it's amazing.
Okay.
It's great.
Okay. So,
and obviously I would say this one, but I feel like that's already a given. Yeah.
Yeah, no, don't do that. I already look red and then I'll blush more. Okay, so questions from the audience. So Kylie Delaney is actually from Oak Park and loved the book so much and wants to know if you have some connection to Oak Park. Why did you choose to set the book there? And looking at the cover and the description of the restaurants, did you base Sullivan's on Poor Phil's?
Good question, because this is Poor Phil's. I did not, because so I grew up in the north suburbs, so she'll know where that is. So it's not far, but I never went to Oak Park until I was an adult, and one of my best friends from high school moved there. And I was kind of obsessed with it. It has like this, it's like an amazing, I just really love it. Like it's really inclusive, it's really diverse. It's really like when she moved onto her street, her husband was like, I'm just so happy. Like no family looks the same, right? It's like, it just is like, it's so wonderful. Like the makeup of each family is different, and every like the spirit is really great. Like anyway, so her husband said like, I'm so happy our kids are just going to grow up and be like, these are what families, you know what I mean? Like, this is what it looks like. And so I just sort of became obsessed with that, with the town. It's not far from where I grew up. I did not base it on Port Phil's, but I will say there is something in here that I believe, this now was so long ago that I did the research. The owner of Port Phil's, I might be getting this wrong, so if I'm getting Oak Park stuff wrong, I apologize, but Oak Park used to be a dry town, and when they first started giving out alcohol licenses, I think that he also had a restaurant that he was one of the first to get it, which is the story of Sullivan's. I kind of stole that when I was reading about it, because it was like, well, yeah, that would make a restaurant so much more successful if you were the one that were allowed, you were the only one that could serve drinks when you had dinner. So I didn't base it on, I have been to Port Phil's before in my life, I think only once or twice. And then when they got this, I was, and I think I have it right on the same street, because I love that street. It's very charming. When they showed the cover, I was like, it looks just like a Chicago place. And then I looked at it, I'm like, oh, I think it is a Chicago. Like, I think it really is that. So that's how that all came about. But it's I did read a couple articles about him, but none of like the history or the family is anything based on that.
Got it.
Yeah.
What here's another great question. What made you stay with this particular story over the years that you took to write it instead of changing to a different project?
Oh, that's a good question.
It's a great, I know, I read that.
I know, I'm like looking at you, I'm like, why did
I know. What do you say?
You did have a book that you put
lunacy,
aside.
total lunacy.
I had forgotten you had a book that you put aside to write this one.
I had started one, and that like, but the idea for Let's Not Do That Again was kind of clawing at the back of my head.
Yeah.
And I was sort of obsessing over that idea, and so I put the one was working on aside and wrote Let's Not Do That Again. But
it's hard, right? Because I always tell, like, and I'm sure you experience this too, like there's something like before you start writing something, you're like, oh, this is gonna be like a masterpiece. Like this is it. Like when it's in your head each time, like it just makes me laugh, because I'm like, no, I actually think this is the time. Like my book, I've written enough of it that I already know that's not, but like when you first start thinking about it and the characters are just in your head, you're like, I'm in. Like this is just gonna come out and there's gonna be no editing. Like it's just gonna be amazing. And then you start writing it and you're like, oh God, this is so hard. It's like a mess, and like it's so hard. And so I think the trick is, like, I always tell my students, like, you can't just give it up because it feels like so hard on the page, because like the other thing that you haven't written yet seems better because you haven't written it. The real answer is, like, I was just always in it. I have, knock on wood, I should say this, I have always, at the end of my books, like once I get like 3/4 of the way through the process, like I have always had another idea. And that's the thing that gets you through. That's my delusion, where I'm like, oh, that'll be the one. If I can just get this will be fine. But the next one is where people will feel like I'm a true genius. And I will say, for when I was writing this, the next idea did not come for a while. I had something very little. And so I was in it, and I never really, I don't know. That is a good question. Like I'm kind of surprised. It was really hard and it was a mess, but I kept going. I really liked these people, I have to say.
Yeah, I wonder if
Yeah.
that has to do with it too, right? You develop an attachment to your characters that to like abandon them in the middle of it feels like malpractice, you
Yeah.
know? Like yeah, yeah. Huh. Great question though.
That is a good question.
Here's another one that's very good. They're all really good. So, how did you go about grappling with gender politics in the book? This person writes that restaurant work can also be fraught with the kind of misogyny that was so surfaced during the 2016 elections. It's so true. So was that something that you had to consider in writing about Sullivan's?
Yeah, I mean, that's another thing that was just in there. It's like, yes, restaurants are so fraught with, I mean, everywhere is sort of fraught with.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a point in the book where one of the characters says it's like that magic eye, you know, those like magic eye things where you like, it's a pattern and then you look and like a deer jumps out at you.
Loved that passage, yes.
And once you see it, you can't unsee it. And that's how I felt about when all the Me Too stuff happened. And it's like, you're like, oh no, but I was not like, nothing serious happened to me. It was just like all this stuff. And people are like, ooh, that's not great. Do you know what I mean? Like, then you're like, oh yeah, that is unfair. Like it's all these little things. So I think, what was the question? How? I don't even know what I started talking about. How or why I grappled
with gender politics in the book, and you know, how did you grapple with that? And was that something that you had to consider, gender politics at a restaurant, right? Is that something that you had to consider when writing Sullivan's?
Oh, I get it. Yeah, I mean, I will say Sullivan's is a more, there's something that was cut later where there is something like in restaurants, everyone does date. And I'm using the word date really nicely. But like, I did cut a little bit of that out. There was one part that it made it seem like it was going to be something else with the bartender kind of like dating all of the different people. But I will say, I think in general, Sullivan's is a more gentle place. Like, because it's a family-owned restaurant. Like there was some flirting, but I don't think it was the most problematic restaurant out there, if that makes sense. Right. Maybe I'm delusional because I'm like, no, Sullivan's is perfect. Yeah. But, because that's not really where the stuff happens that people like the gender stuff takes place in other places. It's all kind of there. I mean, there's a lot of like what's expected of people, you know, women and men and how it's different. Yeah. Just in everywhere. Yeah.
Sullivan is this sort of, and that, I mean, I said this at the beginning of our talk, and why I loved it so much is that it's like, it's kind of this like, this cocoon, right? Where like whenever as a reader, when I was like back in Sullivan's in the book, I was like, oh, I'm able to like breathe again because I'm like back in this place where there's like delicious fried food and someone to pour me a drink.
And I wrote so much of it during the pandemic. I was gonna say, I wrote so much of it during the pandemic, and I think I don't think I know, but like, I love sitting at a bar by myself to eat dinner and like read a book and have a glass of wine. And I know you love it too. And like there was a point where like, when I would write about it, I'm like, I gotta dial this scene back. Cause I'd be like at the bar and a dirty martini showed up and she got like chicken. And I was like, I want to be there so badly. Like it was really both like wonderful and awful to write about it. Cause I was like, I miss that. I miss
oh my gosh
at the bar. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, my husband says that there are like whatever, how many love languages there are. Yeah. My husband is like, yours is someone mixing a cocktail for you. Like that's like that, like that is my love language. Like when someone mixes me a cocktail, I'm like, oh my God, thank you so much.
Jenny, my editor said, she goes, I just realized that the Sullivan's love language is bringing each other drinks. And I was like, and what's a finer love language? Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. There are two more questions, which I think is perfect. I think that's like probably what we have time for. So, Beth Schifflins, I hope people are okay with that I'm saying their names. Says, congrats on the new book. This is a great question. I think that people always find this interesting as well. So when you have a story in mind, what's your process for taking that from idea to first draft? Do you outline the entire story first and then write within a specific framework? Or what's your process? Talk about that a little bit.
Mine is super messy. Anyone who's taken my classes knows this. Like I tried to outline the first book I tried to write in grad school, which I never finished. And it just was not for me. And I like one thing I've learned is like early on, I just write whatever scene I want. I write out of order. I write in a notebook in the beginning. Do you do that?
No, I can't read my own writing. It would be a disaster.
Oh, mine's a mess, but it's like Word documents seem so mean when you have like one sentence that you're like, I only know one thing. And then you write it and then you're like, I know, like it's just there. So like when you write in a notebook, I really like that because you write questions like, and some of my questions are like, what happens? Like, who is this? So I write in a notebook in the very beginning, and then I write like a mess, and then I print it all out and I start organizing it there. I will say, like, in your MFA program, did they talk to you about, like, did you do any structural work? Because we did
No,
not. No.
no,
Yeah.
no.
And I am trying to be a little bit more aware of that now, because it's fine. Like, I think in the beginning, I always tell my students, like, just write and you'll figure it out later. And if it makes it in the book, wonderful. And if it doesn't, you probably had to know that scene for something else, right? So like, there's no wasted writing. There's no wasted scene you're going to write. And I believe that 1000%. However, I think maybe I could be a little bit more economical. So like, that's what this is all like. I'm trying a little bit harder this time to be like, let's think before I like veer off.
I mean, you have the bulletin board. I've like bought in like my past as a writer, I bought like 2 bulletin boards that never got used and like a stack of index cards because I was like, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna like, I'm gonna Carrie Matheson this shit, and I'm gonna have like everything all over walls and like things, and it just like I end up writing on like one note card like chapter 1, and then.
But are you outline? Do you outline?
It sounds like I outlined a little bit more than you do. I have to know like.
It's not at all. You're like.
I feel like I have to know like what I'm writing towards, and that thing inevitably changes as the book progresses. But if I don't know what I'm writing towards, I like get like really into the woods.
Yeah. Wait till you see the bulletin board I have my eye on. It's like the size of a whole wall. I mean, it's going to be amazing, but it does feel like Carrie Matheson. You're solving crimes. You have to get the joys where you can get them.
You're solving crimes. Okay. Megan Angelo asks or says, my favorite character in the book is Rose, the grandmother, who finds ways to assert her independence, even though she doesn't have the latitude her granddaughters do. Oh, yes, absolutely. I loved Rose too. Also, Rose has a famous Bloody Mary recipe, which I'm requiring you to share with the Zoom call before we end. So just come up with it if you haven't thought of it. Okay. So the question is, can you talk about creating her, Rose, and thinking about the relationships between her, Gretchen, and Jane? Great question.
That is a great question. And also, I will say, Megan confirmed something. This has not happened in my family, but there is a part where Rose, the Bloody Mary recipe, she talks about how she lies to people. She gives them the wrong thing. And Megan said that happens in her family. And it's a common thing. I've never had it happen to me, but my mom has said too, that people have done that where like they like leave out an ingredient because they don't want you to have their party trick. That's great. Yeah, which is like so mean, but kind of passive aggressive in a way I love.
Oh my God.
And they're like, go ahead, make this cake. I hope everyone enjoys it. Like, you suck. Rose was really hard. Yeah, there is a moment, and I liked writing Rose. I mean, that was another part of sort of like the idea of like being a woman, and like it depends when you're born, right? It depends how you're born. It's like there's a lot of that, but she just didn't have it. And I do like the idea that she's like, sure, be strong, but also like put on lipstick. Do you know what I mean? Like she's like, don't be disgusting. Like, and there is her big thing, which I think unfortunately, not with my characters, but I think it went more generations down, is like she is really like restrictive around food, which and like is sort of obsessed with bodies. And I think like that's one thing that I feel like I sound like I'm 100, but like with like college students, you're like, I'm so happy that like kind of that's going away. But like there is this line where Gretchen says something like, I think she was always hungry, and that makes me really sad. And it's like she never really gets to sort of talk about what it meant for her to be a woman. Jane does, like, but Rose had a good time. Rose had a great time in life.
And what is in the Bloody Mary recipe?
Okay, so I actually don't have a real recipe, but I will tell you, it's just how I make Bloody Marys, which I was a server and had like a very short-lived time as a bartender because I was not good at it. And everyone kept, and again, in a restaurant that I was bad at it.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
I mean, I would love to have you as a bartender.
Thank you. I mean, I was fine with the beer. The thing was too, like, I was working when I was training with this guy who, like, people did come in to see him. I mean, this actually is pretty similar to what it is. Like, people came to sit and watch football and have this one guy make their drinks. And so when I would say, like, do you want a Bloody Mary? And they'd all be like, you know what, I'm gonna wait for Brian to do it. And I'd be like, come on. So, like, I mean, I was just out. They didn't want me to do it. You have to put horseradish in it, Worcestershire sauce.
Right.
You have to have a pickle in it. I mean, there's nothing groundbreaking in it. It's just sort of getting the right. It's more horseradish than you think.
Okay.
And then
Okay.
I think the best part about a Bloody Mary is, like, don't be shy. If you have a drink where, like, a piece of bacon is a garnish, go for it. But the pickle juice, I mean, pickles, I love pickles. So, like, the pickle juice is a big part of it.
Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. Now I'm gonna go have a Bloody Mary.
Yeah, great.
Any other questions from folks in the audience? This is so, I mean, I could like talk to you all day long, but you know that already because we often do talk all day long. So that's not a surprise. But any other questions from anyone else at home on the screens? No.
Those were all really good.
It's a wonderful book. I'm seeing, like, just can't wait to read it. It is an absolutely wonderful book. I was smiling, the vast majority of the time when I was reading it, if I was not, like, getting teary-eyed or eating. I ate a lot during this book. So
again, highest compliment. And I just have to say thank you so much, because Grant is still on his tour and he took time off of his tour to do this for me. Which is, like, the nicest thing.
I would not have missed it. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you.
To you, Grant and Jennifer, both of you, for taking the time to be with us tonight. This was such a wonderful conversation and discussion and reading. And I think we are all so excited for this book. Again, to everyone, one last push. You can buy the book from Greenlight Bookstore with a 10% discount, or from your local indie. And we'll see you all next time. Have a great night.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.